So there's this paradox in spiritual discourse that on the one hand, we are perfect just the way we are. On the other hand, we need to do the work. We need to improve ourselves. We need to become our best self, implying that we are not already our best self. And even worse, in psychology, there is this trend that's been going on for the past century or so of diagnosing people with mental illnesses. And don't get me wrong, there is plenty of use to diagnosis. There's a reason why we do this, just like there's a reason we name a bird and an elephant, and a tiger. We would treat a tiger and that form of matter and energy very differently than we would treat a little bird that comes to sit on our windowsill. So there is a use, there is a practicality to diagnosis, but there are many drawbacks to it. And one of the major drawbacks is when we diagnose and we say, this is wrong with this person. They're depressed, they're anxious, they're traumatized, they're OCD, borderline, whatever it is you want to call it. That becomes the focus. That becomes the category with which we now look at the person. And not only is that something that we overlay on the person may take that on themselves and start to identify with this belief that, oh, I am this way. I am broken in this way. And rather than, it could be that sometimes a diagnosis helps somebody get a sense of relief, a sense of, it makes sense what's going on now, that I have some way to think about and maybe even treat or approach these set of symptoms. But it could just as easily become something that hinders a person, where it becomes an identity. Suddenly they don't have depression, they are a depressed person. Suddenly they don't have OCD, they are OCD. And the identity becomes core to them. It becomes something that they attach to, just like we can attach ourselves to a name or to a nationality or to an identity, any old identity, any old belief that we are this way. And we'll try and make what is fluid and flowing solid and concrete in a way that is permanent. And we do this for many different reasons, but it gives us a sense of security. It gives us, as human beings, a sense of this is how things are. This is an understandable world. This is an understandable world outside of me, and I can also understand the world inside of me. But when we take on these beliefs, when we say, oh, there's something wrong with me, there's something not enough with me, I need to get better in order to be perfect, this is a treadmill, an impossible situation that we set ourselves up for. And this is something that is a difficulty both in, regular psychology as well as in regular old spirituality, where suddenly the goalpost keeps on, getting moved further and further. And the sense that you never quite get to that place of best self. You never quite get to the place of healed. You always seem to be burdened with this sense of there's something wrong with me. There's something broken. There's something inadequate. And yet, what spirituality tells us, and what spiritual psychology, one of the perspectives that it brings, is that, in fact, the imperfections, the wounds, the things that happen to us, they're not things that make us broken or wrong. In fact, they are the very place where our greatest gifts come from. And one of the things that I like to, one of the frameworks that I like to use is the sense of the core triangle. And this core triangle has in one corner your deepest need or your deepest wound. On the other, it is your core gift. And at the top is your service, the way that you are called to serve. Now, these 3 points of this triangle are interrelated. They are connected. And what may seem like our core wound actually is what gives rise to the very thing that we are most talented at, the very thing that makes us gifted. This is something that Carl Jung first observed. When you find the wound, the gift is not far away, or sometimes often is hiding right behind that wounded place. And usually how this shows up, usually how this is expressed in people, is that the very challenges that they had growing up, the very things that made life so difficult, oftentimes become the very things that help a person to either empathize with others that are going through something similar, or the challenge force them to grow and adapt and become more resourceful, more, just like a grape flourishes and becomes sweetest in the hardest of soils, so human beings become, gifted and talented by way of the cracks and the hard times. And the third part of this triangle is the service. What then do we do with this gift? Well, oftentimes we feel compelled and called by our soul, our deepest self, to bring this gift out to the world, to use our talents to actually help others. And oftentimes, the very people that we are called to help are the people that have the very same kind of wound that we suffered when we were younger. So, in this way, it becomes this kind of circle, where the wound gives rise to the gift compels us to be of service, and the service itself is to heal the wounds that others experienced. And oftentimes, in healing the wounds of others, we are also healing our own wounds. So it becomes this kind of circular triangle. My point with all this is that it's just kind of like that line that there's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And when we see someone seemingly burdened or doing something that seems to be doesn't make much sense, or maybe we find in ourselves we're doing something that is hurtful to others or ourselves, or is self-defeating seemingly, when we look at how a person got there, or how this form of behavior, this pattern of behavior came about, usually there is some inner wisdom as to what is going on there. That we're not really, it's not apparent maybe exactly why a person is doing that. For example, I was working with somebody that was depressed for many, many years, 15 years or more. And he was taking antidepressants and, even considering shock therapy was what his therapist was recommending. But when we actually started to work together and using some of the techniques that to really kind of get down to the core of what's going on in his subconscious, we quickly found that actually this depression was a prolonged form of grief. Grief for the loss of a sister many years ago. And this depression was, in fact, the person realized, not something that was kind of a haunting or a debt as he experienced it, but rather a slow drip to be able to maneuver and handle the intense grief of the situation, instead of feeling it all at once in the moment, spreading it out over a long period of time so that it was manageable, so that he could still show up functionally himself, both for his own sake and also for the life of his remaining sister, and for his parents as well, most likely. So the ways that we respond to the world oftentimes contain in them hidden wisdom. A child that's acting out may, in fact, not be the issue in a family dynamic. It could be that the child is actually drawing the parents' attention away from their own issues, from their own troubles and wounds, from their own conflicts. If they have to reorient to the child, ironically, it's bringing the parents closer together. And a child acting out might, in fact, be a deep expression of love for their parents, and an attempt in the only way that they know how in that moment to bring the family closer together. The whole ethos that we are perfect the way we are, and yet we can always be better. This is not a paradox. This is true. Both sides of this coin are true. And it only seems like a paradox because when we look at a person, we have these blinders on. We're only looking at people in this moment as they are right now. We don't see them in the full context of what a life is, both the future and what they can become and where they're going, but also in the past and where they've come from, their personal history, their family dynamics, their culture and ancestral history. Oftentimes these patterns get passed on in ways that is not very apparent, even to most people today, and even into modern psychologies. We don't usually pay attention to the ancestral traumas and the ways in which these patterns get passed on from one generation to the next. And so one way that I like to think about this is when we look at nature, when we look at the world, we don't ever find a wave, as Alan Watts liked to say. We never can take a photo of a wave and catch it doing something that is unwave-like. At every moment, at every frame of that wave's existence, it is perfect in the way that it is curling in on itself. It is doing it exactly right. And similarly, we can never catch a picture of a raindrop falling in an incorrect way. We never find a rock formation or a stone that has been shaped wrongly. Nature arises and emerges perfectly, completely naturally at every moment and in every step. And it's just the same way with human beings, just the same way with our minds, with our psyches. We are a process. We are not a moment in time. We are a process. We are an emerging and adaptive psychological and biological and social, interpersonal process. And so what might seem crazy, what might seem damaged or hurt, taking in isolation, can actually be a wise and, in fact, perfect response to an imperfect situation, a constantly changing and challenging world where we're forced to find ways to survive physically, to survive socially between one another, and recover and heal from generations and generations of really scary and difficult and trying circumstances. And yet all of this is happening in a way as natural as waves arising on the ocean's surface and crashing on the shore. As natural as a tree growing its leaves and wilting them in the fall, letting them fall, as natural as wildfires sweeping through and taking away all the old growth, all the old detritus, and making way for new life. There's seeds that only sprout after a fire has come through and wreaked its havoc. So when thinking about healing, from one perspective, we are already fundamentally unbroken. And yet, we are always in the process of adapting and changing. And these are not contradictions, they are part of the same whole. They are part of the same imperfect perfection that is life. If you'd like to experience the power of spiritual psychology yourself, go down to the description and sign up for a one-on-one coaching consult with me. After booking a call, you'll automatically be considered for possible scholarship funding and get access to my newsletter, as well as receive a free 8-minute guided exercise to help tap into your true self. If you want more, down in the description, you'll also find a link to join my community circle, where we gather on Zoom every week to share nourishing conversation about spirituality and psychology. Or follow the links in the description to join the Stable Awakening Discord for a thought-provoking discussion and a monthly reading group where we read Alan Watts, Carl Jung, and other spiritual classics. Thank you for joining me, and I hope to connect with you soon.